The night before Russia's most celebrated national holiday, something happened that no amount of propaganda could paper over. 264 Ukrainian drones tore through Russian airspace simultaneously, not toward the front lines, but deep into the country that has spent 3 years telling its own people it is winning. What unfolded on the night of May 8th was not just another drone attack logged in a war report, it was a declaration, a demonstration of reach, a direct assault on the story Russia has been selling to itself since the full-scale invasion began. By the time you finish reading this, you will understand why that single night may have shifted the trajectory of this war more than any battlefield exchange in months. Let's establish something fundamental right from the start. A coordinated, multi-directional strike involving 264 UAVs, launched across several Russian regions inside a single operational window, does not come together overnight. What happened on May 8th was the product of months, possibly longer, of route intelligence, target selection, electronic warfare analysis, logistical preparation, and operational planning. Nothing about this was improvised. Nothing about it was reactive. This was a deliberate, premeditated strike, and it was time to land on one of the most emotionally charged dates in the Russian national calendar, Victory Day Eve, the anniversary when Moscow fills Red Square with tanks and missiles to remind the world, and more importantly its own citizens, of Soviet glory. Ukraine did not stumble onto that date. The calendar was part of the weapon. Look at where those drones were aimed and you begin to understand the sophistication behind the planning. Moscow, Yaroslavl, Rostov-on-Don, Grozny. These are not random coordinates. Every one of those cities represents something specific within Russia's war-making architecture, symbolic, economic, or logistical. Moscow is the political heartbeat of the regime. Yaroslavl holds critical energy infrastructure. Rostov-on-Don is the command and logistics spine of Russia's entire southern military operation. And Grozny, the capital of Chechnya, carries a message aimed directly at Ramzan Kadyrov, the strongman who has sent his fighters into Ukraine and built his domestic political brand around the image of untouchability. Each target was chosen with precision. Each strike was addressed to a specific audience. Start with Moscow, because what happened there demands its own analysis. City Mayor Sergei Sobyanin confirmed that 26 inbound drones were intercepted overnight. The Russian Federal Air Transport Agency was forced to restrict flight operations at Vnukovo and Domodedovo, two of the capital's major airports, shutting down civilian air traffic on the very eve of Russia's grandest military spectacle. Hold that image in your mind for a moment. Russia, which has invested years and enormous political capital in projecting an image of invulnerability at home, was forced to ground flights in its own capital, not due to weather, not due to mechanical failure, but because Ukrainian drones were incoming over Russian cities. That is not an operational footnote. That is a crack in the foundational narrative the Kremlin has been maintaining for 3 years. Russia's Ministry of Defense announced that all 264 drones had been destroyed. That claim deserves serious skepticism. Moscow has a well-documented institutional tendency to inflate intercept figures to protect public morale. If the official number is 264 kills, reality almost certainly looks different. Fewer intercepted, more reaching their targets than any official statement will acknowledge. And the evidence available outside official channels tells a different story. Video circulating across Telegram and social media platforms showed thick black smoke billowing above the Yaroslavl oil refinery. Fires burning at industrial sites in Rostov. Drone strike footage emerging from Grozny. In the modern information environment, suppressing that kind of visual evidence at scale is effectively impossible. The ground truth on May 8th, assembled from open-source intelligence and citizen reporting, confirms that Ukrainian drones struck what they were sent to strike. The Yaroslavl attack warrants its own dedicated focus because its significance extends well beyond symbolism. Explosions were confirmed in the city, followed by fire at an oil refinery, with video evidence documenting heavy smoke rising from the facility. Energy infrastructure has become one of Ukraine's most deliberate and consistent long-range strike priorities, and for good strategic reason. Russia's war economy is underwritten by energy revenue. Every refinery struck, every fuel depot damaged, every piece of energy infrastructure degraded represents a measurable reduction in Russia's capacity to finance and sustain prolonged military operations. Ukraine has been executing this line of effort for months with increasing regularity and reach. May 8th was its most ambitious execution yet, and Yaroslavl fit perfectly within that strategic framework. What happened in Rostov-on-Don, though, cuts even deeper into Russia's operational capacity. This is not simply a large southern Russian city, it is the nerve center of the entire southern military axis. The logistical hub, administrative backbone, and forward command infrastructure supporting Russian forces across southern Ukraine flows through Rostov. Preliminary reporting from May 8th indicates that the Agroprom Zapchast industrial facility came under missile attack, with local residents describing multiple explosions and a significant fire. Rostov's regional governor, Yuri Slusar, confirmed that both UAV and missile attacks had struck the region, acknowledging damage across Taganrog, Bataisk, Rostov itself, and the Matveyevo-Kurgansky district, while simultaneously reassuring the public that there had been no fatalities. That is the careful language of a local official trying to balance panic prevention against physical evidence his constituents can see outside their windows. It is a difficult needle to thread. The strategic logic behind striking Rostov goes beyond the immediate damage. Every attack that compels Russian civil defense, military planners, and air defense operators to redirect attention and resources toward protecting the Russian rear is an attack that pulls those same resources away from the front. Air defense interceptors are not infinite. Radar operators have limited bandwidth. When Ukraine forces Russia to defend Moscow, Yaroslavl, Rostov, and Grozny simultaneously in a single night, it stretches and fragments Russian air defense networks in ways that reduce their effectiveness everywhere at once. This is the economy of force principle applied with precision, deploying a relatively low-cost asset, the drone, to generate disproportionately expensive defensive requirements across the adversary's entire depth. Ukraine has learned this lesson thoroughly, and May 8th represented its most ambitious application of it. Then there is Grozny, and the targeting of Chechnya's capital adds an entirely different dimension to what was already a complex strategic operation. Drone strike footage from Grozny spread rapidly across social media. Ukrainian political commentator Serhiy Sternenko was direct. Kadyrov was being sent greetings, courtesy of Ukrainian drones. Unpack that targeting decision carefully. Kadyrov has spent years cultivating an image of power, loyalty, and immunity. His fighters have been deployed into Ukraine with enormous public fanfare, and his domestic political platform rests heavily on projecting strength. By striking Grozny, Ukraine is not just hitting a geographic target, it is puncturing a carefully maintained myth. It is telling the people of Chechnya and the broader Russian public watching through their phones that the war the Kremlin insists is being fought far away in Ukraine is in fact coming to their streets. Moscow, Yaroslavl, Rostov, Grozny, nowhere is exempt. This is the distinction military strategists draw between destroying an adversary's capacity to fight and attacking their will to fight. Refinery strikes and logistics hits erode physical capacity, but a drone appearing over Russia's capital on Victory Day Eve, that attacks something more psychological. It creates a contradiction between the triumphalist parade unfolding on Red Square and the sirens wailing over Russian airports. Ukraine on May 8th was doing both simultaneously, degrading infrastructure and dismantling the narrative. The date was not a backdrop. The date was the point. The date was not a backdrop. The date was the point. To fully grasp the weight of May 8th, you have to understand what happened in the 72 hours before those drones launched. Because this attack did not emerge in a vacuum. It emerged from a diplomatic collapse, and understanding that collapse changes everything. On May 4th, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a unilateral Ukrainian ceasefire, effective from midnight on May 6th. This was a calculated move, not a gesture of weakness, a test of Russian intent designed to be conducted in front of the entire watching world. The Kremlin's response was illuminating in its completeness. Silence, continued shelling, ongoing military operations across Ukrainian territory. Russia did not acknowledge the ceasefire. Russia did not honor it. Russia simply kept fighting. That is not the behavior of a party interested in peace. That is the behavior of a party that has decided continued military pressure is more valuable than any diplomatic pause. Here is where Russia's position becomes not just cynically transparent, but strategically revealing. On that same May 4th, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced its own unilateral ceasefire for May 8th and 9th, Victory Day. The precise window when Moscow would be hosting foreign dignitaries, filling Red Square with military hardware, and projecting imperial confidence to global cameras. Russia wanted quiet for its holiday, not out of any genuine desire to stop the killing, but to preserve the optics of a triumphant, undisturbed spectacle. And to secure that quiet, Moscow issued what can only be described as a threat wrapped in diplomatic language. Any disruption to the May 9th parade would be answered with a massive missile strike on central Kiev. Read that again. Russia declared a ceasefire and simultaneously threatened to obliterate Ukraine's capital if Ukraine interfered with a Russian national celebration. That is coercion dressed in the clothes of diplomacy. Zelensky's answer was unambiguous. Russia had violated the ceasefire Ukraine had declared beginning May 6th, and he promised a mirror response. In the operational context of this war, that phrase is not rhetorical. It carries specific meaning. What Russia delivers to Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, Ukraine reserves the right and the growing capacity to return to Russian soil. May 8th was that mirror response delivered at scale on a date chosen to land with maximum psychological impact. And more broadly, it signaled something the conflict's entire history has been building toward: the era of asymmetric vulnerability, where Russia could strike deep into Ukraine while remaining largely insulated at home, is closing. Ukraine's long-range strike capability in 2022 was limited by range constraints, available platforms, and the political conditions attached to Western-supplied weapons. That reality has shifted dramatically. Ukraine's domestic defense industry has developed and is mass-producing long-range first-person view drones, jet-powered strike UAVs, and maritime systems that did not exist when this war began. The 264 drone salvo of May 8th did not originate from Western stockpiles. It came from Ukrainian factories and Ukrainian engineers. That distinction matters enormously. Ukraine's ability to strike Russian territory is no longer gated by Western political decisions about what to provide. It is increasingly self-generated, self-sustained, and self-directed. This fundamentally disrupts the Russian strategic calculation that Moscow built its war planning around, the assumption that it could outlast Ukraine through superior manpower and industrial output, grinding resistance down over time. What May 8th demonstrates is that Ukraine is not simply absorbing punishment while waiting for external intervention to tip the balance. It is actively building new capabilities, new operational doctrines, and new methods of imposing costs that were never part of Russia's original equation. A Russia that must now dedicate significant air defense capacity, civil emergency infrastructure, and intelligence resources to protecting its own cities and refineries is fighting a more expensive war than it budgeted for. Every interceptor missile expended over Moscow is one that cannot be used over Kyiv. Every ruble redirected toward homeland defense is one pulled from frontline operations. The arithmetic of this war is changing in real time. The international dimension of May 8th cannot be separated from the strike itself. This attack landed in the middle of active discussions about potential negotiated settlements, American diplomatic engagement, European pressure for an off-ramp, conversations at every level of Western foreign policy about what a workable end to this war might look like. In that context, Ukraine's decision to launch its largest drone strike on Russian territory to date sends a clear signal, not just to Moscow, but to Washington, Brussels, and every other capital running scenario analysis on this conflict. The signal is straightforward. Ukraine will not be a passive participant in negotiations about its own future. It will continue developing and exercising the capacity to impose real costs on Russia, regardless of the diplomatic temperature in any given week. Any framework for ending this war that fails to account for genuine Ukrainian security interests will not hold, because Ukraine has now demonstrated unmistakably that the alternative to a real settlement will remain painful for Russia. That is the strategic reality May 8th has crystallized. The war has entered a phase where neither side can deliver the decisive blow that forces the other to capitulate. The question now is what Moscow does next. Whether Russia's response to drones over its capital on Victory Day Eve will be measured, or whether the humiliation of that night will provoke something that pulls this conflict into territory none of the involved parties are prepared for. That answer will define everything that comes next. Watch this space carefully.